I'm just going to start with a really simple yes or no question. Are pesticides contributing to the decline in bee populations globally? Yes or no, Matthew?
No.
I don't think so, no.
It's a matrix effect. I'm sorry.
I'm not sure.
No, they don't.
No.
No.
Let's start with the matrix effect. What do you mean by that?
I think that the decline we've seen in honeybees, there's no one factor that can be attributed to that. So there's been losses over many, many years. In fact, the first loss of bumblebees, for example, actually occurred 20 years before some of the neonicotinoids were even on the market. But it's about habitat. You know, agriculture is now, they're almost like powerhouses. The area, particularly in the East Anglia, you've got such intensive agriculture, but that's resulted to achieve the production that we need to feed everybody, then that's resulted in increased or reduction in any habitat, taking out hedgerows, removal of wild flowers. So there is a knock-on effect from agriculture, but it's more in terms of habitat and sort of situation that means that these other areas that the honeybees and wild bees would normally forage on is being removed. But we need to do that to increase our yields of crops.
Mike, we've mentioned habitat and monocultures. What other factors are impacting on bees?
Well, the three things I had in my mind were linked to that. There would be food, parasites and viruses. And when you speak to a beekeeper, certainly in the UK, as we do, I think their major concern is the varroa mite and the viruses transmitted by it.
Klaus, surely though, the amount of chemicals that are used have some kind of impact, because that's certainly, as Sanjeev has outlined, the impression in a vague way that many consumers have.
Yeah. I mean, I subscribe to the fact that bee health is absolutely depending on many, many different factors. And if you want to have a proper discussion, you need to go country by country. It's like a fingerprint, and you have to understand what is happening in this specific country and what are the most important factors in this specific country. For example, varroa mite in some countries in the world is not an issue. In other countries, it's a big issue. How are pesticides interacting with it? I'm convinced if they are used according to the label instructions, they represent really the minor part of the issue. And this was interestingly confirmed by a survey which was put forward by the European Commission in 2011, when they were asking bee research institutes and also beekeepers in Europe what, from their perspective, is the key problem. And it all ended up in diseases and parasites. It also was a high number of responses dealing with beekeeping practices. Nutrition habitats is a major issue. And interestingly, poisoning, including pesticides, was not named as a major factor.
David?
I think I would be in Katie's camp with regard to the multiple stresses that are involved. I think Hymenoptera, the bees and social insects as a whole, have a very low tolerance for multiple stresses. It's to do with their metabolic profiles and their ability to produce certain enzymes. That makes that particular species, out of all the insect orders, the most susceptible. So.
Matthew, things are slightly different in Australia for bees.
They are, Charlotte, and I suppose just to start, I'm going to facilitate open discussion. I'm going to put on the record, I'm going to express personal views here today, not necessarily official views of CropLife Australia or CropLife International. Australia, I think, highlights one of the great examples that shows from the EU decisions. If you think the problems that government can create are bad, just wait till you see their solutions. Australia is one of the world's largest user of neonics, something that's forgotten in the discussion, a technology that was developed to have a less lethal impact from an accidental occurrence than all the products used by farming before them. so largest user of neonics, and we have a growing bee population, and we have no colony collapse disorder. And so the key factor, of course, again, not wanting facts to get in the way of bad decisions in the EU, is we don't have varroa mite and we don't have small hive beetle. And they're the issues that then put real stresses on bee populations. And that's when, you know, you can have other impacts. An extra stress, for example, then will have an impact. Of course, in Australia, the greatest threat to native Australian bees is the introduced European honeybee, the bee used for honey production and for pollinating. So there's multiple examples, but this simplistic, oh, it must be chemicals, is false, it's wrong. There's no real data to support it. But more dangerous than that, and it's the thing that concerns me about the debate, is while ever activist groups wish to reduce the debate to that, we don't find the solution to address the problem. And that's the real threat. And of course, the other issue is we have a larger, both in Australia and globally, a bee population now than we did 30 years ago. So the facts don't seem to get in the way of this debate a lot of the time.
Why is a neonic not just an added stress in your matrix of stresses?
I think pesticides, if they're not appropriately used as recommended on the label, they can be an added stress. But I think it's important to remember, as long as they're used in accordance with good agricultural practice and as recommended, then they shouldn't add stress. But unfortunately, there are occasions when farmers don't always follow the recommendations, and then it does add to the burden that the bees are struggling with.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're doing this in a slightly different way this morning. If you want to jump in, if you want to make a point, wave your hand in the air and I'll bring you in. We thought that would be easier than trying to save all your questions on these various topics until the end. So if anyone wants to jump in, then please do. The EU does have a ban on 3 neonicotinoids. And I am an instant expert on this, as Sanjeev would say, because I made a film about this for Countryfile about a month ago, so obviously I know completely everything about it. One of the things that did become clear during that piece was that although it was advertised as a 2-year ban, which is being reviewed this autumn, it is very likely to go on, particularly because some of the studies that are being done as a result of it won't be actually ready in time. Where, from your point of view, is the science on this? Because everybody you talk to says, well, we'll just do what the science tells us, and then the science doesn't seem to be able to give it a nice binary yes or no. Do you want to start, Mike?
Yeah, so for me, I mean, the science goes down a lot of dead ends sometimes, and it almost gets turned now into sound bites and you know, sensational stuff. And so you get things around people saying laboratory tests are good, field tests are bad. I mean, it's really not as simple as that. The way I would look at it is you generate the data, you look at it holistically, and you make an assessment of the risk. And one of the key things I think they make with the laboratory tests is that it's accurate. I accept if you do stuff in the real world that it's not as accurate as a laboratory study. But set against that is the fact it's a huge extrapolation from a simple toxicity test in a laboratory to how that affects a bee in the field, let alone how it affects a beehive in the field. So in some ways there's a lot of science, there's a lot of data. There was probably enough data out there to take a decision beforehand. There's even more data now, and so I don't think it's at all data light, and I actually think it's one of the most data-rich areas, neonicotinoids and bees. It's just people are not keen to make a judgment. Because even the European judgment, it's not these things are bad, it's like these things may be bad, we're not sure, we're just going to sit on our hands for a few years. So.
Or you could argue, just playing devil's advocate here, that you're taking the precautionary approach, which is sensible in the circumstances.
The precautionary approach, based on what? That was the question we had in 2013, because when the assessment of EFSA was published, we were quite taken by a big surprise when we saw this report, because actually what we saw was that they used a new kind of a risk assessment scheme which we didn't know, and which has not at all been agreed by the member states, and which is still not agreed by the member states. So in 2013 there was a situation which was slightly chaotic because the basis of all these decisions was unclear. which poses a huge issue for the industry because we need a halfway stable regulatory environment and predictability of decision making. So that was one of the big issues, and then it was really rushed through. The process was kind of rushed through. We didn't even have a chance to interfere into the discussion. And interestingly, the other thing was this fairy tale of the 2 years ban. At no point of time it was a 2 years ban. It was a clear restriction for certain uses in certain crops, with the only announcement to revisit the decision 2 years later. But it's not restricted to 2 years, so it doesn't stop now.
There have been a number of derogations, wonderful word meaning exceptions. So here in the UK, some farmers in some areas can use neonics on their oilseed rape. The same is true in other countries across Europe. That surely makes a difference, doesn't it? Both to the argument and to the practicality of it all.
And some of the countries that have granted the derogations voted for the ban. So how do you piece that one together?
Charlotte, I've got to say, I'm sorry, this concept that the precautionary approach, this let's just ban it, is the safe approach, is an entirely flawed argument. Hundreds of millions of euros have been taken off agricultural production in Europe as a result of the ban. Farmers in Europe have been forced back to older chemistry, which probably is more detrimental to bee population health. This concept of let's ban it, it'll all be safe. The actual ban is going to be a greater threat, I think, to European bee populations than anything. In Australia, the regulator, well, because you're forcing farmers into using older chemistry that neonics have replaced, you really will cause problems. You have a massive economic impact on agriculture. In Australia, the regulator simply looked and said, well, there's been suggestions of problems here. They looked at data. They said there is no empirical evidence. There's no independent data that would verify a ban, and have allowed it. And you know, at the end of the 2-year period, we see that advantage. Now, I'm sure Australian farmers are ecstatic that the EU will continue that ban. It probably gives them a competitive edge against European farmers. They may well be advocating with the activist groups. But the concept that somehow putting the ban in place is the safe option is a flawed approach. It's not.
We'll move on, just park that thought for a minute, because we'll move on to talk about the perception versus your reality, she said carefully. I do work for the BBC. I am paid not to have any opinions. Let's talk about the regulatory systems, because what happened in Europe is very different than what happened in Australia and also in the States. So where does the difference lie? Who wants to pick that up?
I have quite a strong view about this, and it's the simplistically in the European scheme, it's the number of safety factors and the lack of an impact assessment. So there was no sort of we're doing this, what's the impact going to be? And so, I mean, ECPA as an exercise ran, I think it was something like 86 chemicals, and here we're talking fungicides, herbicides, insecticides, not just insecticides. We ran 86 through the scheme, and this was freely available data, and 86 out of 86 did not pass the proposed draft guidance that's in place. Okay, even fungicides and herbicides, because they put a safety factor for exposure, you put safety factors when you've got bee data and you want to take it across to represent bumblebees or other bees. You put a huge idea about how much a bee eats rather than actually measuring how much a bee eats, and it's just one on top of the other. And so, you know, it's really unfortunate the neonicotinoids were the first things to face this, because anything that faced it and anything that will subsequently face it, as it currently stands, will fail. So it's not even partially discriminatory, as opposed to the US EPA, who's have a scheme, it is precautionary, and things are screened out and pass. And the USA EPA are also prepared to entertain and look at field and semi-field and higher tier data, something the European EFSA just decided it's not to a good enough standard. And I think they are the major differences. And I don't know too much about Australia. other than England won the Ashes. But
I'm so glad somebody mentioned that. I was being polite.
I thought it had come up earlier than this.
It's quite late in the game, really. Yeah.
but clearly they also have a what sounds like a much more pragmatic and holistic system there to assess risk.
Well, so it's interesting because they've now got this new Australian roadmap that's just come up for risk assessment, which was released only in the last couple of weeks or so. And I see that's borrowing heavily on the EFSA guidance. I'm just curious if this pragmatism that you're seeing in Australia is going to continue, or it's a bit worrying. I saw that EFSA, they were citing the EFSA guidance quite frequently in there.
Yes, except that the difference is that they're going to base it on empirical evidence, on the data from the laboratories and from the field. And again, the Australian regulator, the APVMA, the Australian Pesticides and Veterinary Medicines Authority, is a truly independent authority, doesn't come under ministerial direction, so is resistant to some of the political pressure that comes from campaigns, either from industry or from nominal environmental groups. And the decision they've made on neonics, they're feeling rather smug from a scientific perspective, I think, at the moment, having all the world data that's coming out now confirming that they made the right decision. But the issue still is about proper use. I mean, as Dr. Barrett mentioned, it is critical for on use, and we've got to stop this conflict in the debate in the regulatory space. It is about the crop protection industry, working with the farming sector, working with the honeybee industry and apiarists, and in fact agreeing groups and regulators together. There doesn't need to be conflict. There needs to be a collaborative approach to achieve both outcomes. They're not mutually exclusive, protecting bee populations and maintaining agricultural productivity.
David, do you want to just jump in there?
Yeah, from a regulatory standpoint, I think the thing that's happened in the last 20 years is the change that's driven by science and the change that's been driven by technology. I think these associations have been made not necessarily based on the data that we have. So science is like that. Mass spectrometry, for example, levels of detection in the environment, they've changed a lot. We're trying to overtake ourselves almost with putting these opinions in place without actually looking at what we understand from the data.
The only thing that occurs to me, just as a obviously somebody who is in no way an expert, despite my earlier claims, is that to an extent, people, particularly consumers, I think sometimes feel that the science can prove whichever way you want the argument to go. You just ask a different scientist, and that is a very confusing place for a consumer to be.
Yeah, I agree. You can. Trying to think of an example, you could correlate varroa populations to loss of overwintering colonies, for example, quite clearly. You can demonstrate that. Pick up any paper and they'll show you this. You know, a colony going into overwintering with varroa, heavy infestation, is unlikely to survive. You could correlate it to what was sprayed on the fields, 3 fields along. If you put your mind to it. So I think it's important we leave the experts to do the probabilistic analysis. I think it's a dangerous tool in the wrong hands. We saw some articles come up earlier. And I think it's a lot of distraction from actually getting to the truth of what we need to do and what we need to achieve. That's a concern of mine, is that we spend so much time in condemnation. We're not actually learning from the science, and we're not actually applying education to beekeepers in their disease controls, in their husbandry practices, working with the agrochemical companies on the usage patterns and the gaps, and improving it holistically. I think that's really, really vital.
Yeah, I mean, it's a classic, isn't it? You put 6 experts in a room and they'll come up with seven opinions, one each and a consensus. So, trying to get anybody to agree on the data and what it's telling us is going to be a challenge. But I do think the crop protection industry also could do a lot more to try and promote. I think they're sort of shrinking violets to some degree, and perhaps not always good at advocating their own, all the good work that they do, and maybe they should be doing a little bit more to, I know that the feeling sometimes is, well, we can't because we're seen as biased, but I'm thinking sort of 30 years ago, when I was then working what was Bayer then, we frequently went to agricultural shows, we were interacting with the public, trying to communicate exactly what we were doing and why we were doing it. And I think there is a real role there, because I know you're a journalist, excuse what I'm going to say next, but you know, you do
It's okay, I'm coming close behind you. I think.
you get dreadful headlines, don't you? You know, Frankenstein food and you know, decimation of bee populations, and these are dreadful journalism headlines that do absolutely nothing to forward the cause. Sorry. Don't take it personally.
Really, I'm not. No, I don't do any writing. Can't spell.
The gloves are off, aren't they?
yeah.
Seeing how the
Yeah.
cricket's been mentioned, Charlotte. There is a factor here with regards to journalism, and actually it's a result of the commitment to professionalism. The BBC, to a lesser extent I would say the ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, has, in that you have that, your great professional commitment is to bring a balanced perspective. The problem is, and we've seen it in the climate change debate, and we see it on the GM side, is to journalists that means get a counter view to every view that's put. So you have 99.5% of the scientific community say, here is the situation. You run that story, but then you feel the obligation to find that 0.5% crackpot to put the counter view, and so it's not actually the community's fault that they believe that there is this disconnect or this argument, because they think that's a 50-50 weighting, where in scientific terms it's not.
Just like to disassociate any of the programs I work on from having any crackpots on them at all.
But even in a given environment like this, where you have a lot of, let's say, biased opinions and a lot of critical opinions, it's possible, like in the US, that Obama launched last year a task force to protect pollinator health, which had a holistic approach, which had really taken all the elements into account, and it was already clear in the objective setting of this task force that it would really target to improve bee health and not to kill a class of chemistry which was under public pressure. So it is possible, and this gives us some hope somehow.
Do you think you have been a bit of a shrinking violet, as it's been described? That you haven't gone out enough and stuff?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we're making efforts now. In Europe, it comes across as still quite defensive, because we are already under so much pressure. So we launched the Bayer Bee Care program, for example, because we realized we have a lot of expertise in us. We have Varroa side products in Bayer Animal Health, and we wanted to offer a discussion platform on the one hand, and we on the other hand wanted to offer a platform where we discuss with the countries what's the fingerprint and launch research projects in like Latin America and Asia Pacific. In these areas, I think the impact is really great. In Europe, we are always on the difficult side. That perception is, you're just defending.
But that's not a reason to not do it.
Yeah, that's why we do it.
You have to get
And we're
out there.
absolutely behind. We have Gillian here. So if you have later questions, she's from the Bee Care Center. Happy that we both can answer more detailed questions.
I think the other thing in Europe, what we've lost is the benefit. I mean, I think food is cheap. You're asked something, you've got something that's intrinsically toxic and it's a hazard. Do you want it or don't you? And you don't look on the other side. And I think this is perhaps why clearly Australia, but also Australia, Canada, Brazil and other countries, they care about their agriculture, and indeed the regulation has a factor looking at risk and benefit, and I think it's got completely uncoupled in Europe, and so it's almost like, do you want this or don't you want it? And it's become too simplistic a question for me, really.
We are where we are. Where do you go? What do you do?
Well, we get a tube and then a train to go home. I mean, I think it is a good question, and I think we're putting in some good practices globally to try and almost mitigate Europe. What we do in Europe, you know, I really don't know. It's not just in the bee area. It's probably speaking to the converted here. I mean, it's groundwater, it's metabolites, it's bystanders, it's, you know, non-target plants where you can't spray a herbicide on a plant in a field because we need to preserve it. It's just gone so far there. My hope is that the member state regulators and perhaps the farming community could come together with the industry to try and come up with something that's workable and holistic and looks at some of the benefit as well. But at the moment, you know, if I'm a European politician, say we take the bee issue, right? Do I do something to try and cure varroa? Do I do something to try and cure viruses? Do I change the environment to provide more food? Or do I ban something? You know, they would like to do something quickly and now and headline. And to be honest, it's probably the best immediate thing you can do for reaction, although totally missing the holistic issue that Katie talked about earlier.
And it's of that example that CropLife Australia looked to partner with the Australian honeybee industry, our National Farmers Federation, watching what was going on around neonics in Europe, realised that what we need to do is bring a holistic solution to government rather than let them make one of those brilliant government decisions. It's what led to CropLife Australia launching last year our Bee Connected app, which means farmers get to automatically communicate with APRIS in their area. All bee connectors, they're registered, they're alerted so they can spray in a safe way. Beekeepers can be alerted and move hives, really that coordinated approach is just that next level. And again, allowed the regulator to make a decision free of pressure on the evidence they had, and products remain on the market and bee populations keep going up.
You need an app.
No, I mean, what I think is, back to Europe, is we need to leverage the discussion on a completely different level. If we keep on discussing neonics and bee safety and all these kinds of things, I mean, there's no way in this current setup in Europe. We need a discussion where we have to engage a lot more as an industry on what's the benefit of intensified agriculture. Do we need this? Do we want this in Europe or not? But please consider the impact if you go away to something else. To all kinds of things, also to biodiversity, to water use, and all these things which are maybe arguments which would resonate a lot better in the public. So I think that we need to learn a new language as an industry as well.
I would agree. I think in Europe as well, there's an awful lot of. The US is a very large country and it has a very large governing body. You know, you can look at Asia and even Australia is the same. You look at Europe and it's a patchwork of different politicians trying to come to certain conclusions. So I think Europe is unique. And there are some knee-jerk reactions, I think, from things that have been discovered. Undoing those knee-jerk reactions is a lot more complicated than perhaps the holistic approach that they've taken in Australia, where they can pull everyone together, and even in the US, as Mike says, it's simple and it's a straightforward plan. So I think Europe, by its very design, makes this process more complicated too.
What about the people who campaign, as they would argue, on behalf of bees, who are very genuinely worried about the kind of chemistry that we're talking about? How do you and they fit in together, or don't you, Katie?
I guess any argument, there'll be always two sides to any argument, and there'll always be those that campaign. But I think there has to be the opportunity to kind of work together and counter their concerns. But I do think it comes back to this, you know, the negative views put forward by some of these campaigners. They're very effective at what they do. One has to say they've really been very good at grasping the headlines, which is where I think we have to shift the balance back and get those farmers and the crop protection industry itself coming back, because the advocates of things like you get people who say, oh well, you know, we could all go organic, you know, but I mean it's not sustainable. Organic farms manage because they're like icebergs, you know, and surrounded by intensive farming where the crop and pest pressure is kept to a minimum because of our current agricultural practices. So, you know, it's not sustainable, but you've got to have that open dialogue and let people then make up their mind. I'm sure, you know, if you had that the science would come through and the sense would come through, but we just don't get that platform.
I mean, these campaigners are usually not the ones who want an open dialogue. I mean, they are not open for discussion. And I mean, there are lots of people out there who are really worried, and we can talk and we have good discussions, but the campaigners are, that's a different area. It's not their model to discuss with us.
I suppose on Klaus's point, I'd seek clarification, Charlotte, on who you mean by those who are advocating for the bees. Are we talking about the global corporate activist organisations who make a lot of money by making city people angry and afraid of things? Because there is no argument with those people. They have a business model to generate a lot of money for themselves. They have an organisation and corporate culture like any other. Then there are those who are genuinely committed to outcomes, and you do find you can sit down with those people. And I think we need to be very realistic about the other side of this debate and what drives them.
Let's just pause for some open dialogue with the people in front of us. Any questions or comments from you guys? I don't know if, I'm assuming we have a microphone is going to come wandering towards you. I have a glamorous assistant. There we go. If you could tell us who you are and where you're from before you say anything else, that would be great. Thank you.
I'm Andy Beer. I'm with Agrow. I've been reporting on this industry for about the last 25 years. I'd just like to make an observation. I think it's interesting you saying that the industry needs to get its voice heard. The industry has been saying this for 25 years and the public won't listen.
Is that because of the way you are putting your message, or...?
Yes.
Yeah, there's been countless initiatives over the years to try to get the industry message out. And that's interesting, actually. CropLife America, they have an initiative to get things out. And they say that in a forum like this, they would say to all of us, whenever you're out to dinner with your friends, try to put the point across, the industry viewpoint across. So you start small, and maybe that's just one way.
Do you feel that? Do you, as obviously leading people in this industry, feel that you are pushing against a fairly closed door?
I'm new to the industry. I'm not of the industry. As I said, my background is defence and defence industry and politics. And I sort of agree and disagree with Andy. When I came to this role just about 4 years ago, the thing that I was completely perplexed about was actually an inherent culture of the industry that was afraid of defending itself, and not even only defending itself, putting the debate into the context that needs to be had about global food production, about agricultural productivity. It was like there was an inherent negative defence of the debate was always, no, we're not dangerous. Well, you don't win any public discourse engagement on that front. And I think the problem is the industry is scientific, and therefore dominated by a scientific culture that still has this wonderful concept that facts and independent evidence wins a public policy debate. And on the other side of this debate are people who will undertake what's the equivalent of guerrilla warfare in public campaigning.
Or they will just genuinely put their viewpoint forward. Because that's all they will argue. We don't have an environmentalist here, so I shall be one for the day. That's all they're doing. All they're doing is saying, this, in our opinion, is dangerous, and we can't afford to lose bees or watercourses or any of the other things which they perceive as being under threat by what you do to make money.
I don't think that's completely correct. There are groups like that, Charles, and I grant you that, and they're the groups that actually the industry and farmer groups sit down and work with. We sit down with them in Australia. There are other groups that don't do that, and if you look at the material they put out, they don't go, let's make a decision on science. They put scaremongering, extreme positions, neonics killing bees. And it's not about a debate, it's about a policy outcome that they're seeking.
We just have a few more minutes. Let's have there's another question just here, the gentleman here. Just tell us who you are as well. Any more questions, just stick your hands up now and we'll get the microphone.
I'm Pradeep Dave from PMFI, India. And with due respect to the journalist and the press, the more importance are given to the campaigner and the NGOs. The first day you will have a title, big headings in the newspaper, and when industry try to explain, they are not taken care. So public is always misguided. When industry comes with the explanations and the scientific data, they are ignored. This is what happening in India now. All NGOs now are under scrutiny, and their accounts are also under scrutiny. From where the source comes, from where the money comes to the campaigner, everything is under now scrutiny. So we always feel that whenever these NGOs and campaigners are given a importance and headlines, and when the industry comes out with the explanation, scientific data, nothing has been published. No headlines. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more comments? Two gentlemen behind. One's got a microphone. Well done.
Jimmy O'Connor, now Envigo, previously HLS. I kind of want to bring a few of the points together. The point that Matthew made about the politics and being able to handle the campaigns which are created by activists. If any organisation knows about that, then ours certainly does in terms of the animal rights. And they are very effective at what they do. You know, it is about grabbing headlines, and please don't take this the wrong way, Charlotte. It sells papers. It gets headlines, gets to the news, and that's what drives the opinions of the public. The public impact the politicians go to, let's be honest, to preserve their livelihood and continue as politicians. Now, coming back to the point that Mike was making earlier about the precautionary principle and the impact, one of the things that we have started to see as a contract research organisation is the impact of what Europe is doing with the precautionary principle. And that is that companies now who are looking to develop new active substances, and I'm thinking about from the Asia-Pac market, actually are not going to Europe, at least not in the first instance, because the cost-benefit exercise to a company in that particular instance means that the decision is easier. They'll just go to the US first, and then if they can create a war chest and they think they will get their registrations, they will then come to Europe. We have seen a definite change in the approaches from the companies. And what is that doing? It's going to disadvantage European farmers.
Yes.
I would like to add on top of what you say, which is absolutely correct, that it's even a risk today to enter the registration process in Europe, because all the evaluation documents will be published. So we will have the EFSA report published in the internet. And I mean, if the authorities in Brazil and in India are going to study this and it's the first public document, you effectively pose a risk on your approvals in the other regions.
Actually, ultimately, you know, the side of the coin, if I was going to be a doom monger and got my crystal ball out, you could almost foresee a time when the European regulators become so precautionary about having new chemistry. We'll have some major disease outbreak, something like potato blight in Ireland, and it will almost take something like that to make the pendulum go the other way, because they're just being so precautionary. We'll have nothing in the toolbox to deal with a major pest outbreak. And I hope I'm wrong, but I have a horrible feeling even in my life that something like that will happen. Then we'll have real food security issues in Europe. We've had the luxury, as Mike said, we've never really had to go without, and we've always had the luxury of plenty, but that can change. And I think, you know, like I say, if I was really being a doom monger, something like that could happen.
Darryl Chapman from Envigo. If I could just bring it back to the discussion about public perception. I'm extremely new to this industry, and I come from a history base where we relied purely on the science to get our message across in an issue around mammary implants. And we had to change our approach from an industry perspective with the huge potential of marketing groups and departments that exist within these companies need to sit down and look at how they counteract the message that's coming from the activists. And until that really occurs, then I think public perception will always be based on, I'm afraid, journalistic headlines.
Mm-hmm. I just want to jump in there because we're going to be talking about public perception, particularly with pesticides and genetically modified crops, after the break, and I am very aware that I have eaten into 5 minutes of your coffee break. Just very briefly, I want to go around the panel, so as brief as you can because there's coffee riding on this. Do you feel, we're in a review situation now of neonics in Europe, do you feel that anything is going to change in the next couple of years?
From an external perspective, no. It looks like the scenario that Katie mentions. You need some disaster to occur for common sense to come into the regulatory environment.
In the next couple of years, I doubt, because of the gathering of the information that's required to address the allegations now?
Sadly, I don't think it will.
I think it can't, and the B assessment is only one. There's many other areas where the assessment process is also in a very unclear and foggy stage, so I think we will continue for a while.
I think it will change. I think we'll get the neonicotinoid users back. I don't want to put a timeline on it. And I think we will have member state countries starting to use studies, data, risk assessment and judgment, and we'll move away from politics, spin and sound bites.
On that note, can I thank the panel very much indeed for a very frank and entertaining discussion.